So this is the first time it's happened to me. I was cleaning around the auxiliary wheel and all of a sudden it wouldn't turn when I turned the shaft. And as I had to keep disassembling, what it looks like is this gear had glue in this groove all the way around, and it was glued to this side of the auxiliary wheel. And so when it's glued in place, this gear meshes with this gear, which meshes with the gear under there, which meshes to the central shaft. But this glue attachment broke, so I had to deeply disassemble the Phoroptor to get to that. And I'm going to reglue it with epoxy glue. Okay, the gear is glued back in place and all the excess glue cleaned off. So a little lubrication and it's ready for reassembly. So to disassemble and reassemble the auxiliary wheel, some parts needed to be removed from the back of the Phoroptor as well. This screw holds one of the three screws that holds the center hub in place. And then there's other parts that have to go back on the Phoroptor so it looks back like this again. And now completely back together again. Typically, JCC lens, when it's reassembled, the shaft on one side and the shaft on the other are typically made parallel so that it doesn't really matter if you assemble it with a spring on this side or if you assemble it with a spring on this side, because the two flat surfaces are basically parallel to each other. However, there's some fairly new Phoroptors that deviated from that norm. (60715-0810). This was made in 2008, the month 10. And what I found is I just finished doing the exterior of 4 of these Phoroptors, and what I found is every one of them, the JCC setup is not parallel with the JCC lens shaft, and I'll demonstrate it to put together both ways. So this is the right and left JCC put back together in the proper configuration. As you see, as I flip this, the lens sits basically flat inside the housing guard. Now once again disassembled, if you look carefully here, you see where this looks fairly flat there, whereas this one appears tilted off. Now this one looks flat relative to it, and this side actually looks a little tilted. I'm going to show you putting the lenses back together with the spring flipped around 180 degrees. So I've now reassembled these JCCs with the spring simply rotated 180 degrees, and you can see how it no longer sits flat in the guard. Now this is not the norm for JCC lenses. In past years they were always made pretty much parallel to each other, or with a very slight deviation that you really couldn't tell just by eyeballing it before you put it back together again if it was exactly assembled correctly. But these are made so out of kilter that you can actually look at it and see which way is correct in advance. So this was a really weird year group, and newer Phoroptors, I have not seen this. In older Phoroptors, I have not seen it this blatant, but for this short year group in 2008, they really did a weird assembly arrangement on the JCC lenses. So what's at issue here is this little tab of the spring goes against the flat portion of the JCC lens unit. And if these two surfaces are not parallel, which obviously this one is not, you get a very different outcome if the tab is put on this side or if it's put on this side. So again, this one is much more blatant. That puts it out of level. But other times it's much more subtle. And so sometimes you put the JCC together and you see it's not fitting flat in the frame. It's not as obvious as this, but it looks a little bit out of kilter, and sometimes you just disassemble, take off these two screws, take off the cover plate, turn the spring 180 degrees, put it back together again, and then the outcome is much better for the final assembled JCC unit.